Hello everyone, my name is Professor Jacob Marschak, and I would like to warmly welcome all of you to the 51st American Symposium on Economic Thought. Today we will be discussing the expected utility theory. For those who are not familiar, expected utility theory aims to explain people's behavior in risky situations, and it does so by making 4 assumptions on people's preferences on so-called lotteries. And first 3 assumptions, they come from the classical microeconomic theory, as you can see here, so-called the completeness, the transitivity, and the continuity. And the 4th assumption, so-called the independence axiom, states that if an agent prefers a lottery A to lottery B, then he will prefer any combination of lottery A with some other lottery C to any combination of lottery B with the same lottery C. And this will play a very key role in our debate today. Without further ado, I would like to invite our precious guest today. And our first guest, dear Dr. Samuelson from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome, Dr. Samuelson. Thank you for being here. It's my pleasure. Secondly, dear Dr. Savage from University of Chicago. Welcome, Dr. Savage.
Thank you, Marschak.
And finally, again from University of Chicago, dear Dr. Friedman. Dr. Friedman? Oh, welcome, Dr. Friedman.
Gentlemen, I am deeply sorry. I had a terrible flight back from Paris.
No problem, Dr. Friedman. Okay, let's start our discussion. Dear Dr. Samuelson, I would like to start the discussion with you, with your comments, because recently you wrote a paper, so-called the Japanese paper, and you raised some serious concern regarding this expected utility theory. So could you please elaborate a bit on your thoughts on this topic?
Absolutely. I did indeed raise some concerns in that paper because I find myself puzzled by several factors of this theory. Not only does it stand on some very shaky foundations that I do not fully comprehend, but besides that, like, this theory is supposed to justify the rationalities behind people's choices on their uncertainty, correct? However, it fails to explain how an individual can perhaps choose not to partake in a fair bet, but at the same time buy a lottery ticket. This is a very common occurrence. And this would imply that the individual is both risk-loving and risk-averse, which contradicts all of the conclusions of this special theory of yours. There is no empirical evidence in favor of this theory, and as we just saw with my very simple analogy, it's very easy to come up with empirical evidence against it. And please do not try to speak of the experiments done by Doctorand NG and Molster, as no one could discern anything from such a pitiful setting.
Those are very serious arguments, Dr. Samuelson. Thank you very much. Dear Dr. Friedman, I know you don't agree with Dr. Samuelson's arguments, and I would like to hear your take on this topic first as well.
Indeed, I'm sorry, Paul, but I have to disagree with you on your points. Did you forget that Jimmy and I clearly stated empirical evidence on the willingness of persons of all income classes to buy insurance? And did you forget the extensive empirical evidence on the willingness of individuals to purchase lottery tickets or engage in similar forms of gambling? And obviously, it seems highly unlikely that there is a sharp dichotomy between those who gamble and those who buy insurance. And this is simply casual observation.
Thank you for your comments, Dr. Friedman. Dear Dr. Samuelson, I would like to also add some comments regarding your idea on the experimental plausibility of this theory. Okay, so indeed there are people who buy lottery tickets which will certainly not yield positive results, and perhaps there's a carpenter in a village in Texas who has some unusual behavior against this theory. But obviously all of this is worth empirical study, but I believe the real question is this. If you had to advise an entrepreneur, would you ever advise them to act beyond this our rational theory? Or if you were a factory owner, would you ever hire a statistician whose formulas do not agree with all of these rational axioms? Since we came to this topic with my comment, also coming back to the axioms, Dr. Samuelson, you also had some comments regarding you also not only comments but also doubts regarding the axioms of the expected utility theory. So can you please tell us your thoughts on that?
saying I had some doubts, I think, is very much downplaying my arguments displayed in the Japanese paper. I have reviewed carefully the axiomatic basis of the theory laid out by von Neumann and Morgenstern. I have found that they have weaved into their work another assumption besides the standard axioms defining rational behavior, which has now been identified as the independence assumption, special independence assumption, if you ask me. But this assumption does not only seem like it comes out of nowhere. I don't really understand how it justifies rational behavior, but it also has some very troublesome implications. Indeed, it seems to show that the individual is capable of cardinal measurability of his utilities, which has been shown to cause very serious problems in the theory by previous work in microeconomics. It's furthermore, it just simply seems to contradict the rest of the axiomatic basis, which is entirely ordinal in nature. So there is clearly something wrong going on there. Finally, I also have some comments regarding your work, Milton and Dr. Savage, and your paper from 1948 on the same theory. Indeed, you laid out a different axiomatic basis for the theory, which did not include this special independence assumption, and you argued it was equivalent to the one portrayed by von Neumann and Morgenstern. Not only do I think that is just completely false, but I also have doubts regarding whether these axioms you have posited even imply expected utility theory at all. One final remark, I just cannot wrap my head around why we use expected utility of all things to rationalize how individuals make their choices over uncertain situations rather than, I don't know, the mean, the median, or any other quantity.
Dear Jimmy, can you figure out what this is all about? I must confess I cannot.
Okay, Dr. Samuelson, this was a lot of points, so let's go over them one by one. First of all, Dr. Savage, why do you think it is the expected utility that matters?
Well, simply because the von Neumann-Morgenstern assumptions imply that it is indeed expected utility which governs over the choice of lotteries under uncertainty. Also, it has just been proved by him that it is so.
I see. That's a very good point, Dr. Savage. And also, I would like to intervene here. Dear Paul, I would like to explain you the fourth independence axiom with perhaps with an example, because I believe there is a confusion that I saw from your Japanese paper, and I believe my example can clear this. Okay, so let's first consider a case where you have the choice between either beer and pretzels and tea and pretzels. So here, maybe you would prefer beer over tea, but maybe you would argue that beer and pretzel doesn't go very well together, so I prefer tea and pretzel to beer and pretzel. However, in the independence case, this idea of choices contaminating each other doesn't really apply, because in the probabilistic scenario, you're choosing between either beer or pretzels and tea or pretzels instead of the and in between. So this argument of yours doesn't really make sense to me. Does my example change your opinion?
I see. I didn't really envision the independence axiom quite under the lenses of mutually exclusive lotteries as I should have. Thank you for your clarification, Jack. However, I am still unconvinced that this axiom is in any way necessary to describe rational behavior, and I am still concerned about its implications in terms of cardinal measurability of utility.
Okay, coming to the cardinal measurability, I know, Dr. Friedman, you have some comments about this. What do you think?
Yes, indeed, I have some comments. I still disagree with Paul on one point. Expected utility does not commit you in any way to cardinal utility, whatever that may mean. If you denote G of A, the expected utility of lottery A, you may notice that any monotonically increasing transformation T of G of A continues to represent the preference order between the lotteries, and this is not only for affine transformations. Also, in my recent work, I proved that the independence assumption does not say anything about the independence of utilities for riskless situations.
Well, actually, on re-examination, I found that our axiomatic system does not imply expected utility. Milton and I might have slipped away some important details in what you call this special assumption. That's why here is a new set of axioms, which implies expected utility, of course.
What do you think, Dr. Samuelson?
I see. Just one thing before I get to this, Milton, your arguments on cardinal measurability make sense. After reading your work, I am convinced that this is no longer a concern about the independence assumption. But I see here, Dr. Savage, like, you did indeed prove the theory with this new set of axioms, but this assumption is still nothing more than a gratuitously arbitrary, special, implausible hypothesis that we cannot believe to describe rational behavior.
It seemed that the discussion had reached a deadlock, but then Savage came up with a new argument.
Gentlemen, let me present to you the argument which will solve all our problems with expected utility theory. I'll call it the sure thing principle. Take Jimmy. Jimmy prefers income A over income B, and imagine two scenarios. Scenario 1, Jimmy gets at event E income C, and at event E prime income A, whereas in scenario 2, he will get as well in event E income C, but this time at event E prime, he gets B. What will Jimmy choose? Of course, Jimmy chooses scenario 2. He prefers B over A, so he will for sure choose scenario 2. And this is my sure think principle, and it solves our problems for sure.
Dr. Samuelson, what do you think about this?
After your very patient arguments, Dr. Savage, I think the time has come for me to admit my defeat. I must eat my own words and reluctantly admit that the independence axiom is indeed important in describing the rational behavior of individuals. In fact, more so than some other axioms I had believed in the past. Thank you for changing my mind on this and taking the patience to convince me with all your arguments. Thank you very much.
Paul, I appreciate you admitting your error, although I must admit that we would have never doubted the axioms if it weren't for this debate. So I thank you for this. And finally, I still admit that some situations cannot be explained by expected utility theory, such as in gambling. And this would justify why we would want to add some complication to the theory.
Dr. Friedman, I thank you very much for your comment. I think it was a very fruitful debate, and I would like to thank all our panelists for this fruitful discussion, but unfortunately we are out of time for today. So I wish our audience also got some interesting ideas from this debate, and I'm going to leave the floor to the next presentation, which will take our discussion further by discussing the work of Kahneman and Tversky. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.